One more time. Good morning. Outstanding. I'm Lori Jackson. I am the President and CEO for the National Safe Place Network and the operator of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center. And I would like to welcome you to the closing. Woo-woo! It has been a great conference. We hope that you have enjoyed yourself and gotten lots out of it, and look forward to next year. So I have just a few housekeeping things to do before we get started this morning. I want to remind everyone that is going back to the airport today that there are some buses available to shuttle you back to the airport. They will be picking up folks in front of this building, in front of the lobby out here. Transportation is not guaranteed. It is first come, first serve. The details of the buses are listed in your program on page 51. So if you have questions, you can certainly touch base with any of the RHY staff. But just so you know, that is in front of this building, okay? Also wanted to let you know, remind folks that CEUs are available. You need to fill out the purple half sheet that is out on the table in front by the banner signing. So if you need that, go ahead and fill that out and turn it back in, and we'll get those for you. Additionally, there are stipend request forms were in your packet, in your bags when you checked in and when you registered. We must have those stipend request forms and receipts back in the National Safe Place Network office by December 15th. That's a fixed date, so please do not forget. The stipend form will also be available on the website next week, so you can email the stuff in or you can mail it in, but we do need to have it in our office by the 15th of December. Also, and very important to our presenters and to our speakers and to us at RHY, please, please, please complete your evaluation forms. We want the feedback. Presenters want the feedback. We want to make this conference bigger and better for you. So please don't hesitate to share your views and your feedback with us so that we can do that. Certificates of attendance and participation will be emailed to you as long as you completed your registration form, whether you did that prior to coming to the conference or if you did that on site and that you signed in at registration, you'll get an email with your certificate of attendance and participation that shows that you were here. Wanted to share that there were door prizes, so please, your door prize numbers are on your name badge. Please check your number on your name badge and compare it with the numbers that were drawn out front so that if you are the big winner, that you will be able to collect that prize before you leave today. One of our exhibitors, Social Solutions, I believe had a drawing for an iPad. They will be in touch with the winner, so just make sure they're pointing at me. The winner's here. We know who the winner is. Okay. Finally, want to share really quickly, the Take One table we moved from down the hall to out front by the banner signing table. So make sure that you walk past that, take any information that you'd like before you leave so that we can make sure that that gets distributed. And finally, do not forget to sign the banner. It has become the standard for the end of conference. We want to be able to have a great record of who is here and information about that. So that is out front. If you have not done that, make sure that you do that when you leave today. Okay. I'm going to mention this because I'm not sure when it was put up here, but there's a note that says, can you see if someone found car keys? Okay. Excellent. It is my pleasure this morning to introduce to you, he can dance, he can hustle, he can wobble. He is your RHY program manager at the central office, Mr. Chris Holloway.
Good morning. Really? You've got 2 hours. You've got 96 minutes. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. So, considering how receptive you all were on the start of our journey together on Tuesday, doing the circle dance, Cindy graciously agreed to lead us into the electric slide here. So the only other person I need to make sure we have up front is Melinda. Where are you at, Melinda? Come on up. I have really the great privilege of introducing our speaker, Cindy. And we spoke a few minutes prior to us coming up here, and she pleaded with me to read her bio word for word, making sure that I pause at every point to emphasize the most granular detail of the things that are written in the bio. So, in my best voice. Okay. So, Cindy Southworth is the President of Development and Innovation at the U.S. National Network to End Domestic Violence. That's all I'm going to read. Cindy has been an advocate for violence against women and domestic violence for more than 22 years. In her capacity at the National Network, she really focuses her efforts on a program called Safety Net. It's a project that deals specifically with putting victims in a place where the digital age does not further victimize them, but it also gives them the ability to avoid further victimization and recognize what options that they have. So she is a tremendous advocate at all levels, federal, state, local. She works a lot with domestic violence and local shelters. In fact, we were just talking before at breakfast some of the great work that she did last year to help make sure that domestic violence stayed open in light of the pending government shutdown. So she has to be congratulated and thanked for that. Yeah, absolutely. A couple of interesting facts that are not on her bio, and I want to share those with you. She apparently started her career aspirations in the hotel restaurant management field. So I'll be interested to hear how she feels about the accommodations here. She makes her own candy. Clearly she didn't bring enough to share with everybody. And I think appropriately, especially given this notion of being such a strong advocate and being willing to question authority, she stated that she started questioning authority at the age of 2, which no doubt established her as a fierce fighter for victims' needs and for social justice. So I am very honored to present our speaker this morning, Ms. Cindy Southworth.
Thank you, Chris. And I'm glad you did not read my bio word for word because In DC, we work very closely with Karma Kottman and her team at the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And there's a coalition in every single state and U.S. territory. So if you don't work with them, I would really recommend you get to know them. They're great allies and partners, and you have so much a crossover in your work. And then through those coalitions, we support about 2,500 local domestic violence outreach, hotline, shelter, and transitional housing programs. And because of the intersectionality of our work, we work so closely with homeless programs, with youth outreach programs, with lots and lots of different community members. Briefly, our signature projects at NNEDV, we were founded in 1990 to create and then help pass the Violence Against Women Act, which passed in '94. And from then, as soon as it passed, we realized there was a need to help local programs and state coalitions and state governments to implement all the provisions in the first VAWA. And so we then started doing state coalition, TA, and support. From there, in 2002, I showed up on the scene with the Safety Net Project, which I'll talk about in a bit. We have a national TA project for all the OVW housing grantees, so all the transitional housing programs that are funded by OVW work with our housing team on things like voluntary services, which is a requirement. Most of you that have that funding know that it has to be voluntary. You can't mandate services under that grant. We have an economic justice project, which is a partnership with the Allstate Foundation, and we work on everything from helping victims get their credit back after an abuser's trashed it. We also focus on trying to help build the economic sort of empowerment capacity of the field. Way too many people doing this work don't make a living wage, and it is a travesty. How do you empower clients and survivors and victims when you can't buy your own groceries? When I worked at a shelter in Pennsylvania in 1992, when I was making $13,999, and that $999 mattered. It was not $14,000. My colleagues that had children were on food stamps, and that was doing the work in the field. We do a national census of domestic violence services, which I'm going to talk about also, so I'll skip that for now. Many of you have found, and if you haven't found, I encourage you to check out womenslaw.org. It is a plain language website with literally thousands of pages of content, and it's all in plain language, and it's custody, criminal laws, divorce, protection order, you name it, trafficking information in all the states and territories. And much of it is in Spanish, and we just got a grant from OVC to expand out all of our Spanish content, so we'll have even more. We're going to make the entire website fully bilingual English-Spanish. It's mostly right now. And then we have a project called Positively Safe that looks at the intersections between HIV, AIDS, and domestic violence. There's a lot of crossover. Someone who is a victim of domestic violence has a higher risk of contracting HIV or AIDS, and people who are positive have a higher risk of experiencing domestic violence. So we do a cross-training curriculum on that. I'm just so honored to be here with you during this 40th anniversary year. It is a huge anniversary year generally for really important laws that have made a difference in the lives of countless. It's also the 30th anniversary for the Victims of Crime Act, VOCA, and the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, FVPSA. And when I travel internationally, occasionally I get to speak with other groups. I talk about these laws because FVPSA was truly transformational in the field. It was the first federal funding that is designated and specifically for domestic violence services, and then VOCA funds countless victim service providers. Without that federal funding, we would look a lot like some countries that are really struggling to provide any basic services. And then in 1994, as I mentioned, the Violence Against Women Act passed. So it's the 30th anniversary of VOCA and VAWA and 20th of VOCA and FVPSA, and then 20th of VAWA. And since I'm here with my friends from HHS and Debbie Powell and others, I have to do a shameless plug about the impact of FVPSA. Each year, more than 1 million survivors and children benefit from the FVPSA network of services. And so it truly is remarkable what can be done. And while FVPSA doesn't fund all those services, they fund the core services. They keep the lights on, they fund volunteer coordinators. It's flexible money, which is so important. You all know how hard it is to get flexible money. So intersectionality. Just before I jump into all the technology pieces, I want to remind us all how we interrelate with our work. Every minute, 24 people are abused and 250,000 tweets are posted. It's just a phenomenal, staggering number. We know the statistics on violence against women, and it's worldwide. 1 in 3 women, depending on the day and the study, it's 1 in 4 women in the U.S. will be assaulted by an intimate partner at some point in their lifetime. We actually had Nightline in our office yesterday, and they wanted to talk about how women and girls abuse men just as much. There's a study that came out, and we keep explaining that violence is always bad. No matter what it is, it's always bad, and it's wrong, and it's illegal. However, it is different than a systematic pattern of power and control dominating the other person. And I'm intimately acquainted with that. My former stepmother was emotionally abusive to my father and to myself, but my father made six figures. My stepmother never did, and my dad was never afraid for his life. He never had to worry about being killed. And she never killed the pets, which so many domestic violence offenders do. So while she is a horribly, horribly not nice person, divorce is legal, and thankfully she is now not in my life. But what I bring that up is when we talk about aren't men victims too? Absolutely. And most often they're victims of male partners in same-sex DV, and sometimes they're victims of sort of occasional violence versus the pattern of systematic control. I love this image that one of my colleagues created. It sort of makes me chuckle because we're talking about teen dating violence with a phone that most teens don't recognize. And when it comes to child sexual abuse, we know that as many as 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 7 boys, depending on the study, it could be 1 in 5 girls, 1 in 20 boys. I don't really care whether it's 1 in 7 or 1 in 20. It's way too many. It's a staggering number. And I frequently, when I do trainings on technology, I tell ballrooms full of parents that your child is safer on the internet than they are at the family reunion. Because it's true. It's Uncle Ernie, it's Cousin Joe, it's the babysitter, it's the faith leader. It's someone they know. It's not likely going to be a predator on the internet. It does happen, but it's very, very rare. And we know that homeless youth, many of them report physical abuse in the home, they report domestic violence in the home, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, huge staggering overlap. And so when I move gears and talk about technology in a minute, these are going to be things that youth that you're seeing saw in their houses before they fled. It may be things they're experiencing right now if they're one of the 1 in 3 that are being abused by a partner. And then it's also very common in child sexual assault to have the abusive partner, the abusive parent, monitoring the children's computer use to make sure they're not reaching out and getting help. We also know that LGBT youth are highly at risk, that anywhere between 20 and 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBT, and that they're 4 times more likely to commit suicide than their straight peers. When I was an undergraduate at Penn State, I had the privilege of working on a longitudinal research project that looked at depression, suicide, and resilience in teens. And this was back in the, I guess it was 89 to 93 in that era. And there had been a long-term study that had been done on teen suicide, and what happened is the report was basically put on ice, and the reason it didn't come out is the report showed such a staggering number of gay youth were killing themselves, and it was a government-funded study, that if that study was released, the government would have to do something about LGBT youth and have to address this phenomenon. And so the report had basically been shelved for a while until there were some leadership changes, and it finally came out. But I was really proud to be part of that study, even just in a small way. And on that side note, I wanted to remind everybody that VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act that passed February 28th, 2013, is the first federal law that has LGBT non-discrimination provisions written into statute. The other 2 big things, yes, it's huge. The other 2 major provisions in VAWA that are like absolutely just life-changing is it finally gave rights to Native American tribal leaders to prosecute non-tribal members who commit misdemeanors on their land. And then the last piece that was a bone of contention in getting VAWA passed was around expanding immigration rights. And we were getting pressure from all sides of the aisle, having a non-federally funded moment here just to tell you about history. The NNEDV does a lot of policy work in our non-federally funded time, and we were getting pressure from everyone, leadership everywhere, to basically compromise, strip out the LGBT protections, strip out the Native protections, and strip out the immigration protections, and just get the bill passed. And we stood strong. So, I don't know, 100 groups nationally, sexual violence, domestic violence, Latino organizations, immigration organizations, tribal organizations. We stood strong and we said, no, the bill either goes forward as is with these provisions in it, or it doesn't pass. And every single week, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, National News were basically saying over and over and over, how could VAWA not pass? It's always been unanimous consent. It's always passed. How can VAWA not pass this time? And we actually got a call from Congressman Cantor's people, and they said, we have to get this passed. This is such a bad thing. The Republican Party is bleeding. We've got to pass this bill. And eventually the correct version of the bill passed with all these protections in it. And I use that as an example to say what we can do when we stand together and don't splinter apart. In terms of talking about violence against women, domestic violence, sexual violence, trafficking, we know that it's not just about physical violence, that it's about control in every level. I'm not allowed to use credit cards. He wants to know where I am all the time. Where were you last night? I'm not allowed to see my friends. It's so much more complicated than just physical violence. And people think that technology is this thing over there. And so this is a visual for people who can't read the text that says things that happen in real life overlaps a wee bit with things that happen on the internet. When in reality, the internet is a subset of our daily lives. We do things that are not about technology, but throughout the day. How many of you have your phone within reach? Stand proud. Absolutely. See? And how many of you sleep with it next to you? So technology is not some wee thing over there. It is very much integral to our lives. So I had the fortune or misfortune of growing up as the daughter of a geek dad. He is an absolute uber geek. He has some social skills, but not too many. And, but we grew up with Pong, we grew up with Atari, we grew up with all the technology you could imagine because he wanted it, and then his alleged reason for buying it was for his daughters. Sure. So we had access to technology from the time I was very little, and I had no interest in going into that as a field. I hated the stuff. We had motherboards on the kitchen table, had no interest. I wanted to do first hotel restaurant management, and then I decided to do social justice work and end indignities and oppression. But meanwhile, I was always the one fixing everybody's computer. So in the late 90s in Maine, after I got my master's degree, I was the one helping install email, fix the printers, deal with the technology issues. And so in 1998, a friend of mine sent me a job description. And they were looking for someone to run, who had a background in violence against women and domestic violence and sexual violence work, to manage an internet project. And she put a Post-it note on it, and she said, "This is you." And I looked at it and I thought, okay, I can speak geek, and I've been doing this work at that point for about 10 years. So I applied and I got the position. And that was really the sort of change in my trajectory. Up until then, I had worked at local programs in Pennsylvania and Maine. I had gone to get a master's degree in social work, partly because I couldn't afford my undergrad student loans, so it was a great way to defer them and get more loans. But partly because I wanted to have that MSW so that I could go toe-to-toe with people that were trying to therapize victims and say all sorts of things, that all victims are bipolar, they're this, they're that. And I wanted to be able to say with some letters behind my name that the DSM, the Diagnostical Statistical Manual, has less correlation to your actual symptoms and more correlation to where you got your master's degree. So it does. And we give people Haldol and really, really major medicine based on where someone got their master's. So they're a specialist in bipolar, and shocking, all their clients are bipolar. Funny how that works. And we give people really serious medication based on that. And I am not to say that mental health doesn't exist. Mental health issues are absolutely prevalent. It's whether or not the DSM really captures it. I consider mental health issues more of an art than a science, and we've got a long way to go before we actually get to a place where we truly understand the nuances. So I moved to Pennsylvania in 1998, and I worked on 2 different technology projects there. The first one was VANET, the Violence Against Women National Electronic Network, and then the second was the Protection from Abuse database, and it was an online database for protection orders in Pennsylvania. And what happened is I was traveling all over Pennsylvania, visiting teeny tiny local programs and if people need to leave to catch planes, I completely understand. If anybody needs to take a call about a client you're working with, please do. I am not a trainer that will ever tell you to turn your phones off. Your work comes before my training, so feel free to step out, keep your phones on vibrate, even keep the ringer on, I don't care. You know, the real work comes before training. And so back to the, I'm traveling the state of Pennsylvania. It's 99, 2000, and local shelters in rural Pennsylvania were just starting to get high-speed internet. And they had no firewalls, no virus protection, they no passwords. These same advocates that would go to jail to protect a victim's paper record would give their password to anybody if you called and said the network is down. And so I was having heart palpitations. I realized that this is just a pending disaster, looming. We're going to have someone killed because their abuser found them through not very secure technology systems, and Dateline's going to do the expose and blame the movement. How could these underpaid, overworked, not very tech-savvy advocates put that victim at risk? You know they would just love to go after the people doing this work. And so I started doing trainings in 2000, and I said, this is coming. We're going to start seeing cases where victims of domestic violence, sexual violence, dating abuse, stalking, trafficking are going to come in and talk about the technology that they're having abused in their lives. And when I did a training in July of 2000, advocates from the front line said, oh, no, it's already happening. And they told me chilling stories of victims being beaten up so that their abusive or perpetrator could get their email passwords, because it's all about control. And so whether it's a victim of sexual exploitation, a victim of domestic violence, they had to have full control over the victim. And so from there, really, the Safety Net Project was born. It took me 2 years then to get funding. I moved to the National Network to End Domestic Violence and brought the project with me, and we got some AOL money to start off and got the project off the ground. And now, 12 years, 14 years later, we now have 6 full-time staff, and we've trained about 90,000 people, somewhere in there. So there's turnover, people move on, so we continue to train. So what we do is we address the intersection between technology and domestic violence, sexual violence, and stalking, and any place there's an intersection. We also provide training and education to police, judges, technology companies, advocates, and we focus really on how tech can be misused or abused by perpetrators, how victims and clients can use technology safely to reduce isolation and increase access to resources. How do agencies and nonprofits and outreach workers keep private information truly private and confidential? And then how can we do more effective use of tech? So we're actually creating an app center. We'll be doing app reviews. I'll talk about that in just a minute. We also work really closely with policymakers to make sure that laws are really thoughtful around technology and privacy. And one of the things that we've been doing more and more of, which is really gratifying, is we work with tech companies. They come to us for advice on how to make sure that technology is less of a weapon to be misused by offenders. And then we're launching sister projects in Canada, Australia, hopefully Ireland soon, and possibly the Netherlands. So just a bit of our background is for the first couple of early years, I was patted on the head a lot. People thought it was cute that I talked about technology. They thought it was a novelty. And someday, when I got past this tech stuff, I would do things that really mattered, like, traditional services. What happened in 2004 is we got some government funding, and we have kept government funding now. We're the TA provider on technology and confidentiality for the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women, and we've had that funding since 2004. 2007, Google called me, and that was really a change. I had been showing up at conferences with all these technology and privacy people, and they couldn't figure out why I was there. Why is this victim advocate coming to our conferences? And eventually they expected to see me there, and they started to understand that the most vulnerable people have the most to lose if there's a privacy breach or technology breach. And so Google called and said, would you be willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement? Sure. And they said, we're launching Street View in a week, and we will be posting pictures of the front of buildings in 8 cities across the U.S., and we're worried there's undisclosed hidden shelters in that data set. Can you help us get them down? Okay. And they said, you can't say it's Google. So I'm calling up our state coalitions like the New York coalition saying, so there's a tech company, a rather large tech company, that's launching a product in a week, and we need you to help us get all 80 shelters in New York City off the internet in a week. And in some states, like Illinois, it's a misdemeanor to give the address of an undisclosed shelter location, so they couldn't even give it to me. So what we created was a form where the local advocates would fill out all of their publicly available information, their outreach office, their P.O. box, all of the names they do business as, And then I asked for zip codes of any hidden location. And so what happened was Google removed everything that was not what they said was their public information. And we got them off. And so the day that Street View launched, I had a CNN producer call me and say, you know, I can't believe Google's doing this, and we think it's going to be bad for domestic violence shelters, and what do you think? And I said, well, actually, Google called me before they launched, and we were able to help them get the shelters down in those 8 cities. And the producer hung up on me, didn't even say thank you, because I had shut down the story. And so I promptly sent a note to Google saying, FYI, I just shut down a CNN story for you. Have a great day. So they've been funding us since. We were asked to join Facebook Safety Advisory Board in 2010, and we worked very closely with them, and more recently we've been chatting with Twitter. And a lot of what we're focusing there is the hate speech, the attacks. How do we make sure that if there is abuse being perpetrated on these platforms, that it can be handled appropriately, reporting mechanisms. And if anybody runs into issues, we do have relationships where we can expedite reports. So if you've got someone who's reported that there was a video of a rape that they need to get off the internet and you can't get it down, contact us and we can get it expedited all the way to the top people. And then in 2013, Airbnb reached out and said, would you help us around safety? And so I've been giving them advice now for about a year. So it's been a change. When I first started, I would show up and try to call tech companies and say, could you please change the way this works? This isn't good for survivors. And now they're calling us and saying, can you help us? We want to make sure that our platforms are safe. So some of the benefits that we found from doing the safety net work is that we've been able to re-engage people that thought they knew everything about domestic violence, sexual violence, dating abuse, trafficking, stalking, child abuse, and they're sort of bored. They're like, oh, no, I went to a training 12 years ago when I got on the bench. I don't need to learn anything else. I'm good. And they'll come to a training on technology. They want to learn about the gadgets and the gizmos. And then while they're there, we weave in survivor-centered practice into all their tech training. So they don't know that's what they're going to get, but it's in there. It's also a great way to empower youth, and not just youth that are clients, but young staff people. It's a fabulous way if you want to have your younger staff who are more tech savvy train everybody else and make sure everybody's up on tech. And one thing I did early on was I sort of threw out the gauntlet to my colleagues and said, you have to learn about technology. You owe it to your clients. And they're like, no, we're busy, we're dealing with this, we're dealing with housing issues and this and that and child support and immigration. And I'm like, no, you have to meet clients where they are, and they are using technology. Therefore, even if you hate the Twitter and you have never used the intertubes, you must learn about it. And I believe that very strongly, that we have to meet clients where they are, and if they are online, we need to go learn those platforms. And I actually love digital evidence. One of the things about someone threatening on a digital platform is it gives you great, very compelling evidence that you can bring into court. And so, you know, one thing I say on air is if you're going to stalk your ex, please do it on Facebook. Facebook loves it when I say that. So one of our challenges was engaging the tech companies. They were really worried that we would trash them nonstop, and so they were a little hesitant to start partnering with us. And what they found is that we like technology, we just want it used safely and appropriately. And so, for example, we don't want survivors to be told to get off the internet. We don't want them to be told to get off Facebook. We want advocates, judges, everybody to be able to use technology platforms. So what instead is we created a guide on how do you change your settings to lock things down. But one thing we know about all of the different forms of abuse and violence, it's about controlling and isolating the victim. A child sexual assault survivor being perpetrated by someone in the home, the goal is to keep the family secret and not to tell anybody. And when someone can get online and find support groups and find information and find resources and find out they're not alone by using technology, it not only decreases isolation, it absolutely can increase their safety, but only if the offender has not put spyware on that computer or phone. So some of our values. We really believe first, do no harm, that we should not be embracing technology in a way that actually further harms clients, survivors, youth, and others. And for me, the way that I can be comfortable talking about technology with clients and young people is to embrace my inner geek. Nurture it, make it fun, get your colleagues and others to find fun things about technology. Take a minute of every staff meeting to share a tech tip. Bring in apps and talk about it, but make it fun so that you're not scared, especially if you've got colleagues that are absolutely tech phobic and terrified of it. You need to bring them along. And as I said, and I'm going to keep saying, no survivor, homeless person, or youth should ever be forced to avoid technology. It is not only not possible in this day and age, it's actually an economic discriminatory problem. It is not possible to have a job anymore where there isn't tech use. Even a retail job, you're using computers now. So we cannot continue to tell people, if you don't want to be harmed, just get off the internet. People should be able to be safe in their homes, safe on the street, safe in their jobs, safe at school, and safe on the internet. The tool should match the need, and I can't tell you how many shiny pennies I have dealt with in the past 12 years. Every community wants to solve, they think, we can end homelessness by a pretty database. We can end sexual violence with an app. That's it, one app. We can end hunger with an app. You cannot eat an app. So if you were thinking of spending $100,000 on a meaningless piece of technology, please hire 2 advocates instead. It is just not, so I love technology, but I don't want people getting distracted by it. And I find that people think that this new technology will be the one thing that will make it all better. So some of our sort of mantras is that technology is the tool, and it can be a tool used by victims, by youth, by clients, by survivors. It also can be misused by perpetrators. And I hate it when people assume. We know that actually urban youth are more likely to be on a smartphone than non-urban youth. And it's partly because non-urban youth may have more access to a laptop or a tablet. But what we're finding is that the way that urban youth are getting access to the internet is on a smartphone. So there's actually higher smartphone saturation. So when people make assumptions based on someone's income level or poverty or race or class, they are making horrible mistakes and not talking about the technology that people are using. And we need to help law enforcement and others understand that this is the same crime. People get freaked out, and I'm like, how have you always dealt with trafficking? How have you dealt with domestic violence in the past? How have you dealt with sexual assault? Same crime, same perpetrator, just a tool. So it's not a brand new thing that you need to be freaked about. And we are here if you've got questions. And I'm going to go over some tech things today, but I don't expect you to remember much of it. What I want you to remember is that technology is out there, and you've got my contact information for the team. If you have questions, you can reach out to us. Essentially, what we find is there's so many different ways that abusers, perpetrators, stalkers, offenders, rapists are misusing technology. What's tricky is just believe people. And so if you believe someone and they say somehow my whoever, my pimp, my John, my ex-boyfriend knows too much about my activities, they know where I am, they shouldn't know where I am. It's entirely possible that they know where the client is because they've put a location package or spyware on the phone. There's so many different ways you can compromise someone's location and safety. So I'm going to talk just about a few of them. Remote Spy is a product that the Federal Trade Commission went after a couple of years ago, and it's a remotely installed spy product, and it allows you, in fact, the day that the Federal Trade Commission filed a lawsuit, the website said spy on anyone from anywhere, and they changed it to spy on your PC from anywhere because the Federal Trade Commission sued them, and they ended up settling and making a tiny change to their product, but the program is still available, it's still on the internet. And they tried to argue, Remote Spy said that really it's about family safety. And if you look at that image, there's nothing in that image that says safe child. Not at all. And when they deposed me, I was a witness in the case, the defense said, what about if the family has a teenager in Switzerland at a boarding school and the young person buys a laptop and the parents don't have access to it, so they can't install monitoring software, and parents are afraid that the teenager is going to find an internet predator. And they said, we need to be able to remotely install spyware in stealth mode so those parents can keep that child safe. And my answer was, call the dorm mother? Like, really? That's the best argument you have for why you're going to create a stealth surveillance tool is boarding school and kids in Switzerland? So Stealth Genie, to the right of it, is a product that we actually purchased in July, and it's a smartphone spyware. And what it does is it allows you to buy the product, install it on someone's phone, and then go to a website, to Stealth Genie's website, and see every website they visited, see every text message sent or received, see every email sent or received from that smartphone. And we actually purchased it so that we could train law enforcement in July at our big tech summit. And September 28th, I guess it was a Sunday, I get this very cryptic and strange email from Stealth Genie, and they said, we're sorry, our website is down, it's down for maintenance, check back soon, because basically it meant that I couldn't spy on my spouse for that, that day. And so I got another email on Monday saying the website is still down for maintenance. And then I got a call from a tech reporter at the Washington Post on Monday, and he said, did you hear that the creator of Stealth Genie was arrested on Saturday in Los Angeles? And I said, no, this is great news. I think I yelled, yippee, one down, hundreds to go. And I think they quoted that. I'm like, great. I look like such a dork. So he said that there's also an injunction signed by a federal judge to take down the Stealth Genie website. So the website was taken down by basically the U.S. attorneys with an injunction, but they didn't conveniently mention that to their customers, which we happen to be one of since we purchased it. Instead, they said down for maintenance. I'm like, down for maintenance because your creator's in jail. He's trying to argue now that really they created this family safety product, and it's not their fault that people use to spy on spouses. So that's the sort of argument they're going after. But there's also GPS products that you can buy that allow you to track your teens, your partner. Some of them say it's about family safety and about teen safety, and you can do things like disable the starter, flash the dome light, lock and unlock. You can actually honk the horn while someone is precariously driving down the sidewalk. So when your teen is driving, the last thing you want to do is startle them. If this is about teen safety, they would not have these features. It's really about terrorizing your partner or your ex. Very much these products are being designed and marketed for essentially criminals. I want to mention spoofing is another thing that you may see, and this is definitely something that youth are very familiar with, is there's different products out there that will let you fake your caller ID. So when you call someone, they think their sister's calling, they think their friend is calling, and it's really their abusive ex, or it's someone else dangerous to them. And what it does is, it's sort of like, how many of you remember the old long-distance telephone cards where you would dial an 800 number? Okay, I'm the only one over 40 in the room. Great. So the long-distance phone card, you would dial an 800 number. They would tell you to put in the phone number you're dialing, and then it would tell you to put in this PIN number, and it would then pay for the long distance. Same concept. You dial the spoof number, you put in the phone number you're dialing, and then it asks you, what number do you want to be calling from today? So you can put in anyone's phone number at that point. Some of them even let you change your voice, so they'll change the pitch from male to female or female to male. And it's really hard to imagine how this is really about safety. I was doing a training of police officers in Texas, and we demonstrated in small rooms. We can do a lot of demos. So we had maybe about 15 officers in a small room. So we actually did a spoof card demonstration. And we had 2 officers come up to the front, and we asked an officer to basically help us out. And we said, okay, we're going to have you fake this, and we're going to have you change your voice from male to female. Well, he thought we wanted him to raise his pitch. So he said, I'm stalking you. So he already did a falsetto voice. And then the product raised the pitch of his voice. So instead of it sounding like a female was stalking, it sounded like the chipmunks were stalking. And while I like showing demonstrations, the thing I hate is I hate giving these companies money. And so we try to keep a minimum on how often we demo some of these, because we don't want to help their bottom line with profits. But all of these are designed to help you essentially fake who you are. And there's been some pretty, we're seeing this over and over. There was a young woman that I worked with years ago. She called me from an Ivy League school. It was actually she and her fiance called and said that her dissertation advisor he had put spyware on her computer. He was reading all of her email. He had not only been harassing and controlling, he actually had sexually assaulted her and raped her in the lab. And what she was calling about was the spoofing. And I said, wait a second, before we get to the spoofing, are you okay? Like, have you gotten services? So we did the whole getting her connected for support. But she was calling about the spoofing, and apparently her, this tenured professor had felt so entitled to spoof her, he actually saved in his phone a contact called Spoof. And so when he wanted her to pick up the phone, he would use the spoof contact and make it look like her fiance was calling or someone else was calling. And she was debating what to do. We talked a whole bunch about how she and her partner, how he could be supportive. And I talked about on-campus options, off-campus options, and it's rare doing national technical assistance work. We rarely hear the outcomes of cases, and that's okay. It's just the nature of the work we do. We frequently get calls from the front lines. People ask us for help on a particular scenario, and then we never hear back. This was one that about 3 or 4 months later, I got a voicemail in my phone when I got to the office one morning, and it was the two of them on the line, and they said that the campus had actually handled it quite well, that they had fired this tenured professor at an Ivy League college, and she went on to say that she was doing well. She had joined a support group, and things were going great, and their wedding was on target, and they basically both just said, thank you so much for being there. And you get those calls all the time. You get to see people that are doing amazing things. Once you get to the national level, you occasionally get to see the impact of your work. And I was like wanting to save that voicemail forever. I just wanted to just record it, hold it, keep it close. And then I realized because I'm a privacy nut and I'm a confidentiality nut, I had to delete it. But I keep it here and just know that the work that you do matters, the work that we do matters. Cell phone spyware. So I talked about Stealth Genie. There's a whole bunch out there. In fact, I'm hoping that what's happening right now is that the U.S. attorneys have more indictments pending. What's happened with cell phone spyware is it's gotten a lot of attention since 2010 when Senator Franken discovered that his Apple iPhone was tracking his location. And so he did a big press event. And the shelters in Minnesota started calling his office and saying, actually, we're seeing this being used all over Minnesota. It's happening all over the U.S. and beyond. And so he did a hearing on cell phone spyware and used a whole bunch of domestic violence and sexual assault stories in his testimony. And from that point, he really asked the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission to step up enforcement and see what they could do. And I know how understaffed DOJ is, but I was also quite disheartened that there's only been one federal prosecution of someone who created spyware, and it's called Lover Spy, and it was back in 2005. Lover Spy was a computer spyware product, and you would send a greeting card to your lover, and it had puppies and flowers on the greeting card, so you could say, I'm so sorry, it'll never happen again. And he or she opens the greeting card, and spyware downloads and installs. So from that minute forward, using Lover Spy, you can spy on your ex remotely. And so in 2005, an assistant U.S. attorney in San Diego indicted the creator of it, and then the creator actually fled the country, and he's now on the FBI's cyber most wanted list. But that's the only other spyware prosecution that I was aware of. And so fast forward to 2010, when Franken started to really raise awareness, he put a bill in, location privacy protection bill, that's probably not going to move anywhere, but at least it's getting lots of attention. And then in September, just a couple of months ago, Stealth Genie was arrested. What I'm hoping is there's indictments against MobiStealth, FlexiSpy, all of these, MSpy, HelloSpy. There's just tons of them. If you do a search on the internet, it's really foul what comes up. In fact, let me... That's all right. I'll do this later maybe. I was going to show you, if anybody wants to do this on your phone, it's quite disturbing. Although if it's a work phone, be careful. That could alert your employers to something wonky. But if you do a search for how to spy on your spouse, you will get millions of responses, millions. I did this in Australia, and there were over 3 million responses because they thought that perhaps this was just a U.S. problem, and I said, how to spy on your spouse, Australia, and got 3 million responses. So spyware is very prevalent. It's being marketed, and from what I can tell, there's really no legitimate use. If it was truly family safety, which Microsoft has a family safety product, Symantec does, McAfee does, all of them run visible. So if you've got teens at home, please do not think you're going to go home and install this. If you want to have a dialogue with your teens about family safety and internet safety, install one of these products like Microsoft's Family Safety. the teenager knows they're being monitored. They know because when they log in, it says your computer use is being monitored. And if they try to do a search for, say, breast cancer and it doesn't go through, you can actually request permission from your parents to allow that search to occur because the word breast is in it. Perhaps it would be blocked. So it's a dialogue about computer use. And with Spectre, which is one of the products on the market that I've purchased and demoed many times, I bump into Spectre at conferences, and they like to come out and talk about how they're keeping kids safe and alive. And then I can pull out stories of women in the UK and in the US and in Australia who've been killed after their abuser put spyware on their computers, found that they were planning to leave, and then actually killed them. But in this case, cell phone spyware is now so prevalent, and because we're almost all using our phones more and more for internet searching, it's what is being monitored now. So one of our challenges early on was law enforcement and others would just tell people to get off the internet. If you're experiencing cyberbullying, well, just get off social media. If you're experiencing any sort of harassment, then just leave that platform, which I kind of liken to the short skirts and the high heels of the digital age. If you don't want to be raped, then don't wear a mini skirt. If you don't want to be harassed, then get off the internet. It's unacceptable, but it's what we're hearing over and over. When we look at statistics on who's being bullied, and I put cyberbullying in quotes because I cannot stand the term. The media likes things that are trendy, and so cyberbullying was trendy. Now sextortion is the trendy word. Again, it's not a new concept. It's blackmail, it's coercive, it's threatening, but it's got a catchy name, and so the media likes to cover it. Revenge porn is another one that is a catchy name, so people are covering it. But when we ask youth, in the past 12 months, have you been bullied? 12% in this one study done by Pew Center for Internet and Society, they're a phenomenal group, 12% had been bullied in person, 9% by text, 8% online, and 7% by phone call. What we find is cyberbullying is just good old-fashioned bullying. It's just people are using the technology that is available. And so when some of us were in school and we had lockers and we were shoved in lockers, or other bullying occurred, or things were written on the bathroom wall, that bullying is still occurring today. They're just using the latest tools because that's what everybody's using. You know, why put something on the bathroom wall when you can instead send it around to every young person in the school? And when we also look at teen dating violence, there's a lot of research that shows that teen dating violence and cyberbullying are really intertwined. And so when they asked about cyberbullying, who the offender is, frequently the offender was an ex-partner or the ex-partner's friends. So they would break up, and it was one of those, if you leave me, I will destroy your reputation, send photos around, kill the pet, tell your parents, whatever, all these coercive threats. But in addition, then it's the friends of the offender send flaming messages, post horrible things. So then the victim of dating violence is being basically assaulted and attacked by multiple offenders in addition to the dating partner. And so what we know from the offline world is that young people, age 16 to 24, have the highest rates of intimate violence. We know that 1 in 3 teens report knowing a friend or peer who has been hit, punched, slapped, choked, or otherwise physically hurt by a partner. Over 11% of high school girls reported have been physically forced to have sexual intercourse, which another name for that is called rape. 30 to 40% of victims are sexually abused by family, 50% by someone they know, and only 10% by strangers. And the reason that I bring this up again is people get so freaked about the internet and think that there's all these cyber predators out there, and there are really very few cyber predators. And there's very few stranger predators. The majority of predators are known. So what we know is offline bullying happens at a rate 10 times of cyberbullying. Cyberbullying does not happen in isolation. So if you find out that a young person you're helping is experiencing cyber attacks, they're probably also being attacked in person. They're very much hand in hand. And we also know there's a lot of judgment and blame. And this is one of my other pet peeves, is a lot of adults like to say kids nowadays. And this is a phenomenon that has happened since, I think, I don't know, cave people. When you think about it, kids nowadays do this, kids nowadays do that. And what's funny for me is when we talk about kids nowadays post sensitive information online, and then you notice their parents are posting every blessed part of their day. from their, vomiting child, to the baby photos, to the, what they ate for dinner, to standing in line at Target. And so I'm sort of fascinated by the contradiction there, the hypocrisy of adults talking about their kids having no boundaries on what they post. I'm like, really? So the best way to role model appropriate privacy controls is to do it yourself as an adult, to be really thoughtful about what you post and to whom and what you share. And so what we actually find, though, is that less than 10% of youth post sensitive information. They're actually quite savvy. They know more about online privacy than the rest of us. And they also know they don't want their parents seeing stuff, so they're quite careful about what they post because they don't want the adults in their life to be judgmental. And we also find that and this is a really tricky thing to talk about, you'll understand it, but when youth are assaulted online or have cyber predators, it's typically not because of something they posted, but because of interaction. And so essentially, if you are a high-risk youth and you are feeling isolated, you feel like no one in your life cares about you, you have no adults that show interest, you are more likely to start a relationship with a 45-year-old man on the internet. But the 16-year-olds that do that do not think that those 45-year-old men are 16. They're very aware that the guy they're starting to date online is 45. And when they buy a bus ticket and go to Connecticut to meet up with that boyfriend, I put in quotes, they know they're meeting an adult man. And so it does not in any way say that I'm blaming those young people. They're basically, horribly at risk. They've been isolated, they've been ignored, and they are trying to get attention from an adult. But the difference is kids who have great support systems, are very involved in activities, are not likely to start dating a 45-year-old man in Connecticut. But someone who you're serving who is at risk otherwise, who feels very, very isolated, is at higher risk because they may be reaching out on the internet to find connection that they don't find in their life. And online solicitations, very few come from strangers in terms of people reaching out. Where you will see some more solicitations from strangers, and this is something to be very aware of, is one of the things about the internet is it's a welcoming place for people who don't feel welcomed and supported in their community. So gay youth may reach out on Grindr and some of the other online apps as a way to try to find community, which also means they're at higher risk of being preyed on because this is a place where they can find support. In terms of controlling behaviors and dating violence, over 25% of young people say that their boyfriend or girlfriend has read their text without permission. One of the things that came up when Chris Brown assaulted Rihanna is she was apparently grabbing her phone back from him. He had grabbed her phone and was reading the text messages. And when she pulled the phone away from him, he assaulted her. And there was a focus group done up in Boston, and the teens were really, really mad at Rihanna. Why did she grab the phone? And I was like, whoa, so if you don't want your face beaten in, just don't grab your phone back. Really? So we've got a lot of education to do. In one of the studies, I think this was the one by MTV, they've got a digital abuse campaign, which is where those images are from. It's a campaign that I've given some advice on, and they said that 11% that a partner has shared private or embarrassing pictures. 17% said they were afraid, or the partners made them afraid to not respond. 10% had been threatened physically by a technology product or platform, and 16% said their partners actually bought a cell phone or minutes for them. That's one of my big red flags. If I'm working with someone and they say, yes, my partner bought me a phone, ooh. And especially if it's an unlocked phone. So if it's an iPhone that's jailbroken, you typically have to jailbreak an iPhone to put spyware on it. You don't have to jailbreak Droids, they just come that way. The way that Android phones work is you can pretty much put spyware on them any time. So if you're working with a young person who said that they were gifted with a phone, be aware that there could be monitoring software on that phone. I'm going to talk about sexting. This is another one of those catchy terms that annoys me, but it's the term everybody knows it by. And essentially, it's explicit photos that are being sent by text message. And nude photos are not a new concept. Adults like to think that it's only a youth thing. First of all, adults have been taking nude photos with Polaroids and with other cameras forever. Polaroids made it easier because you didn't have to take your film in to be developed by someone else. And then digital cameras came along, and couples in love could share photos with each other without having someone to develop them. So this is not a new phenomenon created by phones. People like to think that teens are doing this and it came out of nowhere and we have no idea why they're doing this. Really, it's people exploring their sexuality with the technology at hand. So what's different is now people have a camera in their hand at all time and being able to take pictures on a spur, on a whim, and then send it to someone. What we find in some of the studies is 51% of teen girls said that they felt pressure from a male partner to send photos. And some of the studies show that there's some sort of bartering going on, is a young woman will be pressured to either commit oral sex or send a sexy photo. And so the girl will think, okay, I can do this or I can do that, I'll send the sexually explicit image. And so they're making choices based on being in a bad situation where they don't have control. And 18% of boys said they felt pressured by a girl to send a sexually explicit or sexy photo. In MTV's A Thin Line, they found that 50% of those who shared a sext shared it with multiple people. What it doesn't get at is whose photo, because what we're finding is if someone takes an intimate photo as part of a trusting relationship and then that photo is never distributed, it was a part of the relationship. However, what's happening is the breakup occurs and then the ex sends it on to the entire school or to lots of friends. And one of my other things recently that I said on a Huffington Post live interview is, please do not use the word data leak. If someone hacks into your camera and steals photos that you took, that's a federal crime. It is not a leak. They didn't jump out of your phone. They didn't leak out of your phone. Someone had to actively hack and commit computer crimes to get your photos. And what's fascinating about that is that how many more women have that experience than men? And it's definitely, people are targeting women. And when I spoke about this on Huffington Post in a live interview, and I called it misogyny and I called it a computer crime, and I asked people, if you know someone who did this, please turn them in, I promptly went and changed all my passwords, because what's happening is if anybody speaks out against Gamergate and all the other online misogyny, is then they are attacked moments later. And so it's really challenging to speak out about this really horrific stuff and then not have you be targeted. Sexting is also showing up as it's absolutely power and control. In one case, a young woman broke up with her boyfriend, and then he sent them out to high school girls, and the girls were harassing her. And this is so similar to what happens in adult domestic violence cases. If you break up with me, I will fill in the blank. I will send this email to your boss. I will publish this. I'll embarrass you with your family. This is happening in this case was a young woman who then ended up committing suicide. And the challenge we're running into is the behavior is not okay in terms of sending images out. It's blackmail, it's extortion, it's coercion, it's dating violence, it's very much horrific. What we're also finding is some really inappropriate over-responses. And so what we want is when people are using technology in a way to harm another, that it absolutely needs to be prosecuted. But in Pennsylvania, there were a handful of 6 high school students, and the young girls were in bras and panties. They were basically as clothed as they would be at a beach. And they sent photos to their boyfriends and some of their guy friends, who then shared them with other classmates. And the young girls were charged with creating child pornography, and the boys were charged with distributing child pornography. Thankfully, in this case, the ACLU stepped in and said, seriously, this is not, and for me, if they were convicted, they would be on the sex offender registry along with people that rape babies. This is not okay. So what the youths are doing is perhaps not advisable, but it is not the same as raping children. I like this crowd. I can be all sorts of preachy and you clap. So 3 common sexting scenarios. This is Pew Internet. They found that the most common scenarios are 2 people in a romantic relationship exchange images, or 2 people exchange images and then one person shares them outside of that relationship with other people. And then the third scenario is 2 people who are not yet in a relationship are exchanging them as hoping that a relationship will soon start. And then there's the one where people just on dating sites send you pictures of their junk, thinking somehow that will entice you to want to date them. I don't get it. And the group is like, everybody's all shuffling and they're thinking, now everybody's trying to figure out, are you on a dating site? Have you received those photos? Have you sent those photos? We're not going to out anybody today. Not doing it. So then the question in responding to this is, who should be charged? How do you handle it? Is the person who took the photo, if it was a photo of yourself that you took, that is not child pornography. It's not advisable, but it is not child pornography. And then what about if you forward it? And so there was a case in Northern Virginia where a high school student received a photo of a classmate, and it was a sexually explicit photo. And he went and showed it to the assistant principal and said, I got this, and this is concerning. And so the young boy did the right thing. He alerted the school leadership to make sure they could do something. And the assistant principal didn't know how to download the photo to get it off the boy's phone, so he said, do me a favor and forward it to my cell phone and so I can look into it. You know where this is going. So then the district attorney charged the assistant principal with possessing child pornography. And this poor principal was like caught up in thousands of dollars of legal fees. And eventually the case was dropped because it was really an inappropriate charge. This was not a case where the assistant principal was going out and soliciting these images. He was trying to help stop something that had been happening in his school. So we're seeing a real over-response. So anytime where you can, you're seen as leaders with youth in the community, wherever you can talk sense into principals, to prosecutors, to law enforcement, have them breathe before they jump in and try to do something really overdramatic. I'm going to switch gears and talk about positive use of technology. Well, we know that technology can be misused by perpetrators. It's also used to enhance safety and protect survivors. And this is my colleague, Erica Olson. Erica Olson and Kao-Fang Lee are the deputy directors of the Safety Net Project. So I'll have up our contact information later, but I encourage you, if you reach out for any support or questions, to email the team, and that's safetynet@nnedv.org, and that'll be on the screen in a bit. But my email is a black hole. I get sometimes 400 emails a day, and if I'm on stage, I can't even respond. But Kao-Fang and Erica are absolutely the power behind the team, and they'll respond to you much more quickly, and we have a couple more staff starting December 1. So the challenge we run into is, how do we help non-governmental organizations, community-based programs, and government agencies thoughtfully and carefully implement technology? How do we avoid the shiny penny problem, the pretty gadget? So there's an app for that. We are finding that the whole world are creating apps, and some of these apps are great, and some of these apps are really nonsensical. For example, there are apps being created to help someone dial 911. So you download the app and you set it up and you install all this stuff, and then you rely on it in an emergency when you could have pushed 3 buttons on your phone. And my concern is, not only is that a huge waste of dollars, federal or private money, it's also having people rely on something that might not work in an emergency. And so if someone is trying to create an app to do something that you can do more quickly and cheaply without an app, then you shouldn't be creating an app. That's sort of the basic. Then we have unintended consequences. So what we've been doing for about 2 years now is reviewing and testing apps. In our spare time, we've been downloading them on iPhones, on Androids, and testing them. And what we find is some of them are really well-intended and thoughtful and unique and creative, and then some of them don't work. In part because operating systems are constantly being updated, and so an app that was designed to work on an iPhone 5 may not work on an iPhone 6. Or the the operating system was just updated and now it no longer works. So one that Dr. Phil's foundation created, called Aspire, was a really creative app that was designed to look like a news service, so it would sort of hide that you're getting help. There were some significant problems in it. And do we have any press in the room? Please don't print this. I try not to attack well-intentioned people publicly. In this case, the app did not actually work on a Droid. So huge problem off the bat. But in addition, the resources that were in the app were pointing clients, victims, survivors to libraries for help. And when my colleague Erica called the library and said, "Did you know that you're listed as a resource for victims in danger?" the librarian said, "What? Who? Huh?" And like, the national hotlines were not in there. It was just quite befuddling. So some of them also, like Circle of Six, really great, well-intentioned thing. The downside that we've noticed, because we test them, is when you set it up with 6 friends to get a notice, if you send an alert out saying, "I'm in danger, I need someone to pick me up at the pub." First of all, you have to have 6 friends. You can't have 3. If you don't have 6, you have a problem. So problem 1. And then problem 2 is you have groupthink. Everybody assumes someone else is on it. So you'll send this message to 6 people saying, I'm in trouble, and everybody assumes one of the other 6 is dealing with it. And there's no way for them to talk to each other to say, are you getting Cindy? No. Did you check on Cindy? Someone needs to check on Cindy. So really creative app that got an award from the White House. So I'm not trashing it. I'm just saying here are some limitations that people need to think about with apps. So we're creating, with some Verizon funding, an app review center where we're going to post some of our thoughts, and we're going to be as gentle as possible. We've also been calling the app creators, so we called the Dr. Phil Foundation, and the staff person there said, you know more about my app than I do. And I'm like, yes, because that's what my team does, is they test things. They're pretty tech savvy. But we'll have that up hopefully starting this fall. We'll start to post some, and we know it's going to be limited because apps are constantly being updated. So if you have apps you want to learn about, you can come to our blog, techsafety.org. We're also going to hope that people creating apps will come and read about other apps' limitations and then design theirs to be a little stronger. And we won't have quite so much cleanup to do. Another phenomenon that I have really mixed feelings about is online chat services. Part of it was that when these came out, RHY started theirs 10 years ago probably. Most everybody was using computers, home computers, laptops weren't even all that prevalent at that point. And one of the things we know is that child sexual assault is very prevalent in the home. And so my concern was you have someone who's going to the RHY chat and chatting about what's happening in their home, and they don't realize spyware is on the computer. And so the perpetrator actually sees that the teen is reaching out for help. And so that was a huge concern. Now that people are moving towards cell phones and doing most of their connectivity that way, it's a little better, but not so much, because you can still put cell phone spyware on the youth's phone. Love is Respect, which is the National Teen Dating Abuse Helpline, has a chat which I like a lot better, in part because they have, they don't use canned language, which is part of it, as RHY has canned paragraphs. And when I tested it and I went on and I pretended to be a child sexual assault survivor, and they kept giving me paragraphs of content. And anybody who does instant messaging, if you get a paragraph at 1 second after you ask a question, you know it's a canned response. They just copied and pasted, oh, here's that one. Here's that one, and it feels really inauthentic. It does not feel like you're having a genuine human conversation. It feels like someone's pasting content out of a Word document. Whereas Love is Respect, they don't use any canned content. They type everything live, even with typos and mistakes, which feels more authentic. It feels more like a human interaction with another person, typos included. So online bulletin boards and speakouts and other things that we're seeing is there are websites being created to allow people to report their own assaults. And some of them are actually saying it's anonymous. But an IP address, an internet protocol address, is actually not anonymous. And everything that connects to the internet has an IP address, so it can be tracked back to someone. So they're saying it's anonymous. Another one actually said it's anonymous, but give us your name and the offender's name. So again, not being upfront and giving people transparent information about what they were collecting. So we're not opposed to these. What we want is people to be very upfront about what you're collecting, where it's going to go, who will have access to it. Is it subpoenable by a defense attorney who has a vested interest in getting his client, the defendant, off? So another couple of, I mentioned the online reporting. We're with online forms. If any of you have a link to email from your website, please get rid of it. And there's a couple of reasons why. If you have a link, then the email ends up being in the sent items on someone's computer, phone. If you use an online form, just like you're buying shoes from Zappos, you fill in the boxes and then hit submit. There's no email sitting in your sent items. And when I started the Safety Net Project back in 2002, I started it after hearing about a woman who had been abused for years. She had teen daughters, and her husband said, if you ever leave me, I will kill you. And she believed him. And then things started to escalate, and she thought, if I don't leave, he's going to kill me. And so she reached out to a friend. First, she found an apartment in the neighboring town, same school district, so her kids wouldn't have to switch schools. And she was planning to move on Saturday when her partner was working. So she emailed a friend and said, Saturday, can you help me move? And oh, by the way, do you know of any good attorneys? And she deleted the message because she knew if it was found, it would be dangerous. What she didn't know is that her abusive partner was either checking the deleted folder, the trash folder, or had spyware on the computer. We don't know which it was, but he found the message, found she was planning to leave, and he did indeed kill her. And that happened in 2001-ish, when I was just founding the Safety Net Project. And so we have on our website, and you can see it, is we actually don't have any live email links on our website. Instead, we have a web form. So you can contact any staff person. But it says, you know, before you fill this out, does anybody dangerous to you know your passwords? Does anybody dangerous to you monitoring your computer use or monitoring this device? So it's basically a baby safety plan before someone reaches out. And you can do that very simply by just creating a web form on your website. And you can do it on a responsive design website, which means it's mobile friendly. And that way the website just shrinks if you're looking at it on a phone. Databases and cloud computing I'm going to get to in just a moment. They're a quagmire of their own. And then texting. We're hearing more and more people wanting to text with clients, and it's a real conundrum because if you are using your personal phone or even a work-provided phone, what happens when you're in a building like this where you don't have internet access and a teen texts you and says, "I'm suicidal, I'm thinking of killing myself"? What happens to that text? It just goes to nowhere, and then 2 hours later when you come above ground from the ballroom, you find out that you've got a teen in trouble. One of the things that we helped the National Dating Abuse Helpline set up was they now do texting, but they actually do it using a third-party product. And when you text the National Teen Helpline, it comes into their computer screen and they text back. But that way, whoever's on hotline gets the text message. It's not going into one staff person's phone to die and not be seen for hours. And then the other thing that they do with that third-party platform is they strip the phone number because the nature of a phone number is identifiable. And we didn't want defense attorneys in domestic violence and rape cases to be subpoenaing the National Hotline. And because the National Hotline has no legal privilege, they can't. They have confidentiality under FIPSA and VAWA. But we didn't want someone trying to subpoena those records saying, "I want the records of Cindy Southworth because I know she texted on this date." By stripping the phone number, the hotline staff never see the phone number, so they don't know who they're actually counseling, which is protective. And then thinking about phones and how often your own family members and kids pick up your phone. And so if you have sensitive conversations with youth in your phone and then your phone is accessible. And how many of you have passwords on your phone? Please, please, please. If you don't, please go put one on. The new iPhone lets you use a fingerprint, which is sometimes working for me and sometimes not. But you don't want your phone to not have a password on it, especially in the work that we do, but generally you don't want me or someone else to pick up your phone and see your weight loss program or whatever else you've installed, right? That's sensitive stuff on these phones. So as someone with a master's in social work who's been doing direct services for decades, I'm going to ask you, do you need to know everything about the people you're serving in order to help them? Right. And unfortunately, and I'm going to poke fun at my colleagues, our profession, is there's a theory that to do a thorough psychosocial assessment is needed before you can do anything, that you can't even provide a sandwich until you know if someone was abused as a child. And you're laughing because you know it's right. We're being trained in bachelor's programs and master's programs that the best way to do any services to anyone is to do a thorough intake. Well, first of all, I need to get to know you before I tell you everything. Like, it is not normal or natural to tell everybody all of your secrets and all of your past harms and your sensitive information. We don't know them. You don't trust them. And yet we assume if you want help, we basically make that a hoop they have to jump through. And people get sort of institutionalized and used to it. They've sort of gotten to where they're just like, all right, you want to know my weight, my height, my this, my that, my pregnancy status, my sex status, my this, my that, what I've done before, what I haven't done, to get any help, to get a sandwich. And I really encourage you to go home and look at all of your forms and challenge that. Think about when you give forms out. Do you do it? Do you ask questions before providing any services? I'm a big fan at an EDV. When you come to meet with us, we will probably offer you a glass of water. And we actually all donate and bring in coffee since we can't buy coffee with federal money. But we will offer you a cup of coffee or a glass of water and maybe some snacks before you sit down and meet with us. which is wild because that's a professional meeting and we do that, but yet young people come in and we expect them to immediately tell us when they last had sex and what STDs they have and what drugs they've tried before we even offer them a glass of water. And I'm sure none of you do that. But if perhaps you know someone who does that, please ask them to change. How about a human interaction? Welcome, I'm so glad you're here. Can I get you something to eat, drink? I mean, we know Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you are hungry and your blood sugar is dropped, you can't think critically about anything. And so I'm a big fan of just making sure you've got snacks around. When I was making my $14,000 a year, I would drive families through the McDonald's drive-thru on the way to the courthouse because mom and kids were freaking. The kids were kicking me in the back of the head because they were starving. They had been up all night at the police department, at the hospital, then came to the shelter, then they were going to court, and they just needed food. And it's amazing how something so little can change the whole dynamic of what's happening. And so I really believe that everybody we work with, they own their own story. They own almost nothing else. They don't own a car, perhaps. They don't own property. They have no control over a lot of things. If they're under 18, society has a lot of control over them. But they own their own experiences, and they definitely own their own victimization stories. So if someone has been raped, abused, molested, trafficked, prostituted, that is their story, and it's their gift to tell us. And if they never choose to tell us, that's okay too. And I think we get into our heads that as social workers, as advocates, as activists, that we need to get that from them or we can't help them. And I say bullshit. We can help them with whatever they are comfortable giving us. And you can talk about something without putting it in a database. I knew a lot of things about survivors when I was doing frontline work. I had survivors come in and tell me that their partners were not very good in bed, or one partner was good in bed, and damn how she missed him. And I'd go to court and see them and think, oh, way too much information. TMI, I don't want to know this. But that never went in her file. It didn't belong in the file. It didn't belong in a database. She shared that because we had a human connection and she felt safe telling me those things. And that happens all the time because we're good at our jobs. People connect with us and they tell us very sensitive things that do not belong in a file and do not belong being reported to our funders. It's just not necessary. So my homework assignment for you is I ask everyone here to go home and get every single piece of paper or computer screen that you ever do with anyone you serve and pair up with a colleague and do this with another person and ask every question out loud. And the reason I say out loud is we skim over things when we read them on paper and don't realize the impact. And if you say it out loud, you will sometimes feel horrendously uncomfortable asking the question. You also may feel horrendously uncomfortable being asked a particular question. And when I did direct service work, we had a 35-page intake in the early 90s. And at midnight or 2 in the morning, checking a family in, again, after hospital, police, you name it, assault, I would be going through this 35-page intake and I would tell families, I have no idea why we ask this. I have no idea why we ask this either. I think we can skip this. I don't know why we have this here. Yeah, I don't know why we have this. Just answer it. And I would do that because I had no idea why we had 35 pages of intake at 2 in the morning. And I'm sure some funder wanted it at some point. We might not even get that funding anymore. But what happens is it's sort of inertia, is you just keep adding questions and adding forms into your intakes, but very rarely do people stop and assess and get rid of things. And so my recommendation is if you do this exercise, it'll help you figure out which questions were easy to answer, which ones were difficult. Could anyone be reworded? My favorite questions to see is check all the boxes that apply of all the drugs you've ever tried. Seriously? Like I've seen like PCP, I've seen literally check boxes, just check them all off and we're gonna put it in a file and that file is gonna follow you around and someday might keep you from getting elected mayor or elected president or whatever. Really? That's very different than saying, would you like a referral for substance abuse services? Because if someone wants a referral, they're not outing why they want the referral. It could be because their partner or their ex or their parents abuse substances. It could be because their child abuses substances. But it doesn't tell you why. They could be a child of an alcoholic. That's why they want to talk. But by putting in their file they want a referral is very different than saying they're an addict or which drugs they've actually tried. And so that's one of the things I encourage is, could any of the questions be reworded to be less judgmental, less damning, less dangerous if the file was in the wrong hands? And I mean, think about it. One of the kids that you're working with is raped, and then you put in all of these check boxes about stuff. Then the defense attorney is going to say, well, was she really high when this happened? Perhaps she doesn't remember because you clearly mentioned she's an addict, so she must not be a credible witness, and there goes the case. And are you uncomfortable with anything that you are answering going into a shared database such as homeless management information systems? And if you're uncomfortable with any of your colleagues reading this in a database, you probably shouldn't be asking it. That's just very, very concerning. And then what might happen if the information was disclosed or compromised? For example, in the rape case, could it kill a criminal case because something was written that was very judgmental? My other recommendation when it comes to papers is to always fill them out next to a survivor. Make sure that you're sitting on the same side of the table, or turn the screen so they can see it, because it basically protects you from yourself. You're not going to write, I think Cindy South was a little manic, she talks really fast and she's kind of a whack, if I'm staring at the paper as you're writing it. So it builds trust. When I go through passport control, I'm always the one trying to look around the screen to see what's in the system about me, because I want to know. I want to know what's in my medical record. I want to know what's in my paper record. And what people forget is that clients own their own records. They have a right to see everything in it. And if you write something that would cause a young person to never come back for help, that's a tragedy. So don't write it. Don't write it in that way. Write it in a different way. Talked about safety, talked about risk, talked about family, versus Cindy brought it on herself. So I'm going to wrap up just mentioning that in the domestic violence and sexual assault space, we have some really strong statutory language. It's actually the strongest confidentiality laws in statute, way stronger than HIPAA. HIPAA's cute, it's fluffy, you can drive a truck through it. And part of the reason it's there, I say this, is the personal identifying information definition is stronger than anything else, because it's not only name, internet protocol address, email address, and any other information that in combination would identify someone. And so in the years that I worked in central Pennsylvania, I served one family from the Middle East. All I had to do is mention the ethnicity or the country of origin, and everybody would know who I was talking about. And in most small communities, that's the case. Even in large communities, you have a lot of things that narrow it down. The woman with 12 children, oh yeah, I know her. The teen that was raped by the football player, oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. That's a breach. So what we did, and I encourage you to think carefully about going down the road of, in response to the pressure from HUD to do homeless management information systems, we decided that the best way for us to get an unduplicated count was to count at the same time. And the way that we count is we don't actually go up to victims and ask them invasive questions. Instead, we count because we already know who we served that day. So we intentionally try not to have anything that's invasive. What we've done with that count in the past 8 years we've been doing it is it works. HUD sort of gently mocked us at first and said, oh, that's cute, but that's not going to actually keep Congress happy. Well, actually, Congress keeps giving us more appropriations when we give them these numbers. And so the numbers are incredibly powerful. And we have state summaries, we have national summaries, we have a national report. And why it works is it's not burdensome. And participation is voluntary, and we have a 91% response rate, which is better than the US Census, and it's completely voluntary. We've kept it short, we've kept it simple, because we don't want to get in the way of service provision. Data collection should never trump services. Services come first, clients come first. The data collection is what we do to document those services. So the participation went up in the years we've done it. It got easier and easier, and most of them said that they didn't even need a prep call. And most of them said that it was extremely easy or moderately easy, and they spent very little time prepping or actually collecting the data, so it was very, very simple. And we've now created infographics using the statistics from it. So essentially we've said that the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, FIPSA funding, has been flatlined. And also what we found is flatlining is the unmet request, our flatline. It's quite disturbing how many people were not able to help. So for example, in one day, we have 36,000 adults and children spending the night and putting their kids to sleep in a transitional housing program or a emergency shelter, domestic violence shelter. And there's 32,000 people that attend a typical national baseball game in DC. So it's just a really staggering number. And then almost 10,000 times in one day, people ask for help, and we don't have an attorney, a bed, a counselor available. And so we are able to get these numbers without anything invasive. And with it, we've had international, Al Jazeera has come in and used this. Lots of reporters use the statistics. I just had someone today ask about housing unmet requests before I came down to the ballroom as a journalist on a deadline from somewhere. And then members of Congress frequently cite this when they're asking for additional appropriations. So we found incredible response. So what I have for you is just a few resources that you can look at. Our blog is techsafety.org. That's where we have everything from revenge pornography, privacy, tips. We have a toolkit that we created with Office on Violence Against Women money, and it's nrdv.org/tools. We have toolkits that we created with OVC, Office of Victims of Crime money, and that's also at techsafety.org. If you would like to come to 3 solid days of training on technology, everything from high-tech stalking to data protection to creating apps, talk to Twitter, talk to Facebook, we do it in the backyard of the tech companies in San Jose or San Francisco. Last year it was the end of July. It's usually the end of July or the first week in August, and we'll be doing it again this year. And you can reach the team. This is our 4-person team that's expanding to 6 in a couple of weeks. And here's how you find us. So email safetynet@nrdv.org. There's all of our social media outlets, and I will be sticking around a bit, so if you don't have to race to a bus to get to the airport, to come chat with me. But otherwise, I just want to thank you for the work that you do. You do tireless work every day. None of you are paid enough. No one goes into this field because you're going to make lots of money or become glamorous or get appreciation. But you truly touch lives every day. So go home rejuvenated, and thank you for the work you do.
Hello again. I'm Debbie Powell, as you know, the Deputy Associate Commissioner for the Family and Youth Services Bureau. And thank you so much, Cindy, for the spirit, the leadership, and expertise you've shown the field of domestic violence, bringing an awareness of how using technology can improve the safety and privacy for victims. So can we give another round of applause? And I also want to thank you for acknowledging the intersectionality of RHY and DV. Sometimes we miss that. So it's so clear to us in the room, but there is such overlap in our work. As you probably know in the room, and Cindy as well, youth who grew up witnessing or being a part of domestic violence are at an increased risk to repeat those relationship cycles as they grow older and have their own families. It takes all of us working together to support and lift up these youth and to help them understand that self-esteem, that love, that appreciation, that permanency. It's about not bringing hurt to them, but those words mean bringing hope. And you do that every day in your work, bringing hope to our young people. RHY Grantees encounter domestic violence with youth and families that we serve on a daily basis. I know RHYTech is planning a webinar and some additional training opportunities to continue this important interchange of information. So please check out our RHYTech website. It's so many resources on that website for you. And so many times we give out information through the RHYTech website, and maybe your executive directors get it and they may not filter it down, but you have an opportunity as well to check out the website and just check it out on a routine basis to see what's there to help you in your daily work. As I think about our time together this week, I see many images. I see the image of the anniversary party with the music and the dancing. A lot of you got some real skills out there. I just kind of sat back in the cut and watched. And I also think about some of the songs that took me way back, and thinking about my getting started on my professional journey and seeing so many young people out here that know you're doing the same thing. And without you, continuing to come into this movement, our young people would be out there by themselves. And so I commend you for continuing to come and bring your passion and all of your commitment to this work. I also remember Jessica and our youth speaker, if you remember yesterday at lunch, and
the mural winners' faces. You know, at first they had such anxiety and fear, actually, at speaking to such a large audience. You know, I told them, I had laughed and said, you know, just because you get older, it doesn't get easier. So keep doing what you're doing. But what I wanted to share with you, and what I remember about that time yesterday, was first the fear and the anxiety in their faces when they first got up here, and then the awe and the joy I saw them experience because you showed them your appreciation and you're approving them, and they felt so confident. I don't know if many of you saw the changes in their eyes, in their face, and I just want to thank you for being who you are, the people that accept young people where they are, that you show them love, and that's what I saw yesterday. Talk about positive youth development. You modeled that yesterday with your applause for those young people. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I also remember seeing many of you and hearing many of you engage in discussions about what you do in your organizations and how you want to do more and how you worry about how you'll do more. Just because you worry tells me that you're engaged, and we're doing all we can do in DC to try to help you continue to do what you do. And so I remember for myself that the decisions that we make in DC impact all of you, each and every one of you, and the important work that you do. And we need to stay ever vigilant to that. Like all of you do every day, we need to do our best for you every day, every single day. And just because we're not in direct service and we don't touch and see the kids every day, we need to come out to things such as this. We need to go to many tumbleweeds and see the kids, touch the kids, hear their stories, because it keeps us grounded in DC. It keeps us remembering what you're doing and why you need us to stay focused on helping you be more effective in what you do. I also remember, and I want to thank you for this, the many positive comments I received from you about how awesome this week has been for you as it relates to your training and technical assistance that we've been giving you. But I also want to thank you for those of you who also let me know when we missed the mark, where we didn't meet our learning objectives, because we need to hear that as well. I love to hear accolades, but I also love to hear how we need to better support you. And when we don't meet the learning objectives that we identify for you in those trainings, thank you so much for being positive when you brought me those comments. And so I want to thank you for that. And please, just take a minute. It doesn't have to be on your evaluation form if you don't have one. Write it down on a piece of paper and tell us more about what we gave you this week and what we need to continue to give you, and we will consistently try to do that for you. And so I hope you all also have memories that you take away. This was our 40th. This is not the end. We have a lot more work to do, and even when we do end homelessness, and we will end homelessness, we will always know that young people continue to need the support of caring adults in their life. So you will always, always be needed, and we need you to stay focused, and we need you to do some self-wellness as well. You see in our funding opportunities, we talk about social and emotional wellness for our young people. Well, you also need to stay well. So you need to do whatever you need to do not to get burnt out, because when you get burnt out, you leave. And young people, we need you. They need you, we need you from DC. So I want you to also take care of yourselves. And last but not least, I want to wish you travel mercies and blessings. I'm so happy that you came. I want you to continue to enjoy the sun of Phoenix. It's beautiful here. Continue to enjoy the accommodations if you're going to stay a little bit longer. And I will see you, not sure where next year, but hopefully we have just as large a turnout as we did this week. It won't be our 40th, but it'll be our 41st. So just as important. So have safe travels. Thank you for coming, and thank you for doing all that you do to support our young people. Thanks again, Cindy. I think that maybe
We could have given you a few more hours. a day. Yeah, I was like,
15 minutes
yeah,
or something.
like,
So
oh
this
yeah,
was
she was
great.
like that quick. Yeah.
Shock and awe is all you can do.